After a long day, Diane sat down to count her earnings. Just the day before, she was fortunate enough that her neighbor, Mrs. Tammy Lasher, had asked her to help with moving the stuff around her house. Even though the work had left her feeling exhausted, Diane found solace in the fact that she had made some extra money. Ever since Diane had moved into the room in an old house, she had known Mrs. Lasher, a businesslike woman who held a welcoming demeanor. Mrs. Lasher was a prominent figure in the local community, recognized and respected by nearly everyone. As Diane got to know her better over time, she discovered that beneath Mrs. Lasher's professional exterior lay a genuinely kind and caring individual. Her curiosity was insatiable. She had an intrinsic interest in everyone's lives, which was balanced by her generous and empathetic nature. While they were working together, Tammy turned to Diane and said, "You've been my next-door neighbor for about a year now, haven't you, Diane?" "Yes, you have quite an impressive memory, Mrs. Lasher," Diane responded. Tammy's eyes sparkled with amusement as she said, "Well, as a community representative, I try to keep track of what's happening in our neighborhood." She paused, a smile playing on her lips. "Even though you've been here for quite some time, I've only seen you a few times." Diane chuckled and replied, "That's not surprising, really. My days are filled with studying and my evenings with work. It seems like I use my place only for sleeping. Luckily, I got this room pretty cheap. Living closer to my job in the city center would be too expensive." Tammy, looking intrigued, asked, "Do your parents live in a different city?" "I'm an orphan, actually," Diane responded. Taken aback, Tammy dropped the wallpaper roll she was holding. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Diane." "No need to apologize. I've adjusted to it," Diane replied, though a hint of sadness tinged her words. Tammy sighed sympathetically. "It must be tough to feel so alone." Diane responded, "Like I said, I've grown accustomed to it. I believe my father is out there somewhere, but he abandoned me before I was even born. My mother passed away when I was very young. I don't have many memories of her, just a few old photographs." Wanting to offer some comfort, Tammy said in a sincere, caring tone, "Diane, if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. It could be anything from problems with your utilities to disputes with other neighbors. I may be just a regular person, but I promise to help as best as I can. I have a few connections that could be useful." Diane offered a grateful smile and returned to her work. Once they finished moving the furniture in the living room, Mrs. Lasher commended Diane on her meticulous work. To Diane's surprise, she didn't just hand her the agreed-upon payment, but also gave her some groceries. "Take these, dear. My household can't possibly finish all of this. Despite being miles away, my son insists on ordering a lot of food for us. He's always making sure we're well fed." Feeling a wave of gratitude, Diane thanked Mrs. Lasher and got back to her own place. However, once alone, she was unable to hold back her tears. Life had been an uphill battle ever since her mother's death. The cold, impersonal environment of the orphanage had been her reality, a place devoid of warmth and love. Diane had to fight for everything she had, always maintaining an aura of discipline and composure. Her innate sense of justice, a trait that had often got her in trouble as a child, also fueled her ambition to study law. She had fought hard to gain admission into law school after high school and had been working tirelessly ever since to finance her education. That day, Mrs. Lasher's simple act of kindness had moved her deeply. It contradicted her belief that no one cared about others. On her day off, Diane found herself browsing through baby items in the store window. She knew she couldn't afford many things, but she still had 4 months to prepare. She was determined to manage it all, even though the cost of necessities like a crib and a stroller was daunting. She thought of seeking out used items online, a more affordable alternative. As for her studies, she decided to take an academic leave to dedicate herself entirely to caring for her upcoming baby. She stepped inside the store and made a modest purchase, some cozy blankets and baby onesies. As she returned home and was admiring her purchases, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Lasher. "Diane, dear, I noticed you coming home. I baked an apple pie today and thought you might enjoy a slice," she said. "Oh, Mrs. Lasher, you really shouldn't have. But why don't we enjoy some tea together?" Diane suggested. Tammy agreed. "Sure, why not? It's always more enjoyable together. My son Samuel is at work again." While Diane prepared the tea, Mrs. Lasher walked around the room, her attention drawn to the baby items spread out on the couch. "Diane, Who are these for?" she asked, pointing at the new baby clothes. Feeling a blush creep up her cheeks, Diane quietly answered, "They're for my baby. I'm expecting in about 5 months." Mrs. Lasher looked at her for a moment, then asked, "And the father? I presume he's no longer in the picture?" Diane sighed. It was the first time anyone had been so direct about her ex-boyfriend, Caden. They sat down with their tea, and Mrs. Lasher said, "Listen, you don't have to discuss it if you don't want to, but if you ever need a shoulder to lean on or someone to listen, I'm here for you." Diane sighed again. She stirred her tea for a few moments, grappling with the emotions welling up inside her. Talking about it wasn't going to be easy. Diane's story began in the bustling cafe where she worked. It was a typical sunny day, with Diane flitting between tables, taking orders in her crisp uniform. The cafe, known as the Cheesecake, was a popular spot, especially on Friday evenings, brimming with lively conversations and laughter. A group of young men and women were seated at a far-off table, and Diane made her way towards them to take their order. "Why did it take you so long? We've been waiting forever," one of the girls complained, despite having just arrived a couple minutes ago. Maintaining her professional composure, Diane flashed a polite smile and apologized for the slight delay, a tactic she often used to diffuse impatient customers. However, the girl seemed adamant about making a fuss over minor details. "All right, Pia, settle down. We just got here. Don't be harsh," interjected a dark-haired guy from the group, coming to Diane's defense. He locked his gray eyes with Diane's, offering her a charming smile. Caught off guard, Diane managed to take their orders and quickly return to her duties. Yet throughout the rest of their stay, she couldn't shake off the feeling of the young man's eyes following her. As they were about to leave, the guy approached her. He introduced himself as Caden and asked for her phone number. Diane's polite refusal seemed to take him by surprise, his confident demeanor replaced by confusion, though he still looked interested. From then on, Caden became a regular at the Cheesecake Cafe. He would often bring flowers and small gifts for Diane, stop by for coffee, and patiently wait for her shift to end, all in a bid to win her over. Diane, a quiet and reserved girl, was known for her dependability and level-headedness. She was respected at the Cheesecake, her superiors appreciating her diligence and dedication to both her work and her studies. Diane was not impulsive, rather she preferred to think through decisions carefully. She had always thought herself capable of handling any life situation, yet Caden's persistent attention left her unprepared, and she soon found herself falling for his charm. Caden, a member of the city's privileged youth, soon became the center of Diane's world. They had only known each other for 6 months, but his conversations about their shared future felt earnest and genuine. He talked about their life after marriage, and even mentioned introducing her to his family. Diane found herself believing in his words wholeheartedly, considering herself the luckiest woman in the world. One day, she was particularly eager to meet Caden. She had been feeling under the weather for a few days, plagued by persistent nausea and fatigue. That morning, she had taken a pregnancy test, discovering that she was expecting. Initially, a wave of panic and fear washed over Diane, quickly followed by a burst of joy. The realization that she was carrying Caden's baby filled her with an undeniable euphoria. She hastily headed to see Caden at his workplace, a bright smile dancing on her face despite the turmoil of emotions within her. Excitement mixed with a tinge of worry. Was it all happening too fast? These worries, however, were overshadowed by the thought that Caden's promises were becoming a reality. They would always be together, they would raise a child, and they would be the happiest family. Recently, Caden had joined his father's business, being groomed to take over the family empire someday. As the only child of affluent parents, he was given his own office right from the start of his career, a fact he often shared with pride. Diane walked into the office building, surprised to find his secretary missing from her desk. However, her heart sank as she found Caden with his secretary, the woman perched on his desk, both of them laughing and sharing an intimate moment. As she barged in, they quickly pulled away from each other, looking surprised and guilty. "Diane, what are you doing here?" Caden stammered, looking somewhat panicked. He quickly composed himself, clearing his throat, and introduced the secretary, Gina, as his childhood friend. Taken aback, Diane pushed her feelings of unease aside. She had an important news to share, and she wouldn't let anything ruin the moment. "Caden, I have something to tell you." Caden, standing awkwardly beside Gina, said, "Diane, it can wait." Trying not to feel slighted, Diane decided that this was not the time to hold grudges. She waited for Caden to dismiss Gina, and once they were alone, she prepared herself to share the news. "So, what's the news?" Caden asked, leaning against his desk. Diane beamed at him. "Caden, you might want to sit down for this." Caden, standing tall and casual, responded. Diane just spit it out. "All right. Remember I warned you. We're going to have a baby, Caden." Surprise registered on Caden's face. He gawped at her before managing to say, "What? We? You must be mistaken. I didn't ask for this." Still smiling but feeling a pit in her stomach, Diane responded, "Caden, what are you saying? It's our baby. Yours and mine." He retorted, "Why should I be happy? I didn't plan on becoming a father anytime soon." "But Caden, you promised we'd be together always," Diane managed to say. "Us? Together? Did you think getting pregnant would force me to stay? If you thought you could trap me with a baby, you were sorely mistaken." His harsh words hit Diane like a punch. She found herself gasping for air. "Caden?" She barely managed to utter his name. Ignoring her, he headed towards the door, opening it with a loud bang. Before leaving, he turned to say, "Diane, go home. I'll call you later. I've got a meeting now. You know your way out." With tear-filled eyes, Diane watched as the door slammed shut, leaving her alone with the harsh reality. That very evening, Caden did get in touch. However, instead of offering reassurances or explanations, he demanded that Diane terminate the pregnancy. He bombarded her with similar messages over the next few days. Ultimately, Caden, barely recognizable from the man Diane thought she knew, met her one more time, this time handing her money. He said it was for taking care of the baby issue and told her to never bother him again. "Mrs. Lasher, please don't think less of me," Diane implored, her eyes pleading with the older woman. Caden's world was different from mine. It was radiant, filled with warmth and light, devoid of pain or worries, just endless celebration. He was so caring and gentle with me, promising that our life together would be nothing but joys and happiness. And I believed it all. I thought I was special, different from the others. But I was just naive and ended up getting hurt. Tammy, her eyes sympathetic, questioned, "Did you love him, Diane?" "Yes, I did. And it felt like Caden loved me too," Diane responded, her voice barely above a whisper. "But how could he love you if he treated you this way?" Tammy shook her head, her brows furrowed in confusion. Closing her eyes, Diane nodded in agreement. "I don't know, Mrs. Lasher. I truly don't know why he acted like that. Or perhaps I just don't want to admit the truth, even though deep down, I know." Tammy, after a pause, asked, "Diane, did you ever consider, well, you know?" Diane, looking shocked, quickly interjected, "No, absolutely not. This baby is innocent. Why would I even think of that?" "That's wonderful, Diane. You're a smart girl. Don't worry. Things will get better, I promise. You know, not everyone has the kind of strength you possess. You even have your own place to live. Let me ask around the neighborhood. Maybe someone has a baby stroller or crib they don't need anymore. Children grow up so fast, and people here respect my opinion," Tammy assured, a smile forming on her face. "I, too, felt lonely once, but I was lucky to find Ben. He was my beacon in the darkness, and we've been together for 45 years, always supporting each other. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Touched by Tammy's kindness, Diane expressed her gratitude. "Thank you so much, Mrs. Lasher. I will do my best to handle everything on my own, but knowing that I have your support certainly makes life a bit easier." Diane still had a few things to sort out, but for now, she could take a break. The most vital thing was that she had people in her life she could truly depend on. This was incredibly valuable, and everything else would sort itself out in due course. Diane now knew the path she needed to take to rebuild her life, and she was certain she would thank Mr. and Mrs. Lasher someday for their kind-heartedness. Tammy set to work preparing the house for Diane and the baby's homecoming. They were due to leave the maternity hospital the next day. Tammy started by cleaning the kitchen and bathroom, and then she sorted the groceries in the fridge. Next, she moved to Diane's bedroom and began dusting the shelves. As she brushed against the leather-bound book, it fell to the floor. It was a notebook, and when it fell open, Tammy saw a page full of neat handwriting. "Oops," Tammy said as she bent to pick it up. She noticed her own name written in the notebook. Although she felt a twinge of guilt, curiosity got the better of her, and she read the entry. Tears filled her eyes as she read Diane's heartfelt words. The diary entry revealed Diane's deep appreciation and love for the Lashers, and she wrote about praying for their well-being. When Diane and the baby arrived home in Mr. Lash's car, he commented on the baby's name. "Levi, huh? That's a good, strong name. May he grow up to be healthy and bring joy to his mama," he said, helping Diane with the baby and their bags. "I think so too, Mr. Lasher," Diane replied, smiling at him. As Diane stepped through the front door, she was taken aback by the sight of her home. Her neighbors had outdone themselves. The house was spotless and beautifully decorated with blue balloons and white flowers. Soft music filled the air, and a mouth-watering scent of home-cooked food wafted from the kitchen. Diane was immediately swept up in Mrs. Lasher's warm embrace. Tammy planted a loud kiss on Diane's cheek and gently took the baby from her arms. The expression on Tammy's face was a mix of excitement, happiness, and perhaps a touch of nervousness. With her voice shaking slightly with excitement, she said, "Well, hello, dear." Diane returned her smile, looking a bit perplexed, and followed the couple into the room. As they sat down to talk, Ben addressed Diane in a serious tone. "Diane, we need to discuss something important with you." "Is something wrong?" Diane asked, a worried look crossing her face. Tammy quickly dismissed her husband's grave tone. "Ben, you've scared her now. Why so serious?" Then she turned to Diane, already smiling, and said, "Ben simply wanted to say that we would like to invite you to stay with us for a while. We want to be close to help you with whatever you need and offer advice when necessary." Diane stared at the couple in surprise. "Stay with you? Oh my, I don't want to be a burden." "Absolutely not," Tammy reassured her. "Our house is plenty big, and our son is away working overseas, so his room is free. We won't take no for an answer. When you feel ready and capable of taking care of yourself and Levi, you can find somewhere else if you wish." Caught up in the moment, Diane rushed forward and enveloped the couple in a tight hug. Mr. Lasher chuckled awkwardly and gently patted her back, while Mrs. Lasher held her close for a long moment. As time passed, life continued on its natural course. The baby, Levi, grew up strong and healthy, and Diane managed to find work. She returned to university and after a successful final year, graduated with distinction. Although Diane had long since moved away from the Lashers, they continued to support her as they always had. Tammy helped care for Levi until Diane found a suitable nanny. In time, Diane moved to a large city where she pursued her ambitions diligently. Her journey took her from a young, lost waitress in a cafe to a resilient, determined, and successful businesswoman. Over 8 years, Diane built her own business, providing a comfortable life for herself and Levi, complete with a lovely apartment in the city center and a car. Diane ensured Levi had a bright future, enrolling him in a highly regarded school where he soon became a top student. His life was rich and fulfilling, filled with exciting activities, sports achievements, and great times with good friends. The Lashers stayed in the same small town, their happiness complete when their son returned from abroad to run his business locally. Although he didn't live with them, he visited them often. "Darling, come take a look at this," Tammy called her husband one day, peering out the window at the street. Parked right in front of their house was a brand new black pickup truck. "This truck's been here since Saturday. I'm a bit nervous. Did you pick a fight with someone at the bar again?" "Don't be ridiculous. Of course not," her husband replied, also looking at the enormous vehicle in their driveway. "You never know who might have a bone to pick with two old folks like us." He laughed heartily at his wife's comment before returning to his comfortable chair in front of the TV. The next day, the truck remained parked in front of their house, leaving the couple uneasy. Ben wondered if it had been abandoned or perhaps stolen. In the evening, having exhausted all speculation about the mysterious truck, the doorbell rang. Tammy opened the door and gasped in surprise and delight. Standing before her was a radiant young woman, a bouquet of roses in her hands. "Surprise!" Diane announced with a radiant smile, wrapping Tammy in a warm embrace. "Oh, our dear Diane!" exclaimed the pleasantly surprised elderly woman. After a moment, she released Diane and ushered her into the house. "Honey, look who's come to see us." "Where have you been all this time, Diane?" Ben chided her later at the dinner table as he piled a heap of delicious dishes onto her plate. "Oh, lay off her, old man. Diane's a busy woman," Tammy said, jumping to Diane's defense. Ben grumbled but reached across the table to squeeze Diane's hand. "We've missed you dearly," he said, a smile softening his stern demeanor. Diane had been meaning to visit the elderly couple for some time, but her busy schedule had always seemed to get in the way. This time, she was determined to clear her calendar, postponing work and rescheduling meetings just to spend time with her cherished friends. With her son Levi on a 3-day trip with his friend's family, she had come alone. As she sat with them, catching up and watching the couple's loving banter, Diane felt a sense of immense joy. Their interaction brought back memories of the early days after Levi's birth, when a usually gruff Ben Lasher would coo over the baby, refusing to let him out of his arms. Despite Tammy's protest that he was spoiling the baby, Ben personally selected and purchased all the baby necessities, driving them over in his old car. "By the way, Mr. Lasher, what do you think of the truck?" Diane asked him casually. "What truck?" Ben responded, confused. "You didn't receive my letter?" Diane asked, surprised. The elderly couple exchanged baffled glances. "I apologize. I completely forgot to ensure you received the card and letter. That was thoughtless of me," Diane said, chiding herself. "Anyway, this is something I've been dreaming of doing for some time. It's not a grand gesture, but please accept it as a token of my gratitude." The new truck, which had been parked outside their house, was in fact a gift from Diane. She recalled a conversation from years ago when she was pregnant and juggling her job and caring for her newborn son. During a rare, unguarded moment, Mr. Lasher had voiced a quiet wish for a new vehicle to replace his beat-up old Honda, fantasizing about taking Tammy on drives in a big truck. Diane had never forgotten this, and now she had the means to make his dream come true. Mr. Lasher expressed his surprise while Tammy simply stared at Diane, her eyes wide. The generous gift had left them utterly dumbfounded. They protested, insisting they couldn't possibly accept it, but Diane stood her ground. Finally, Mr. Lasher relented, accepting the keys with a grateful nod. "We spent the entire day wondering who could have left a truck right in front of our house. Oh, Diane, you truly surprised us. We can't thank you enough." The couple beamed at each other, acknowledging that they were overwhelmed not so much by the gift itself, but by the heartfelt sentiment behind it. Absolutely, the Lashers were financially capable of purchasing a new car by themselves. Their son Samuel frequently suggested that they let go of their trusty old Honda so that he could present them with a more contemporary model. Yet the couple consistently declined his offer, favoring their old, reliable vehicle. Mr. Lasher had occasionally grumbled about the car's antiquated features and shortcomings to Diane. However, this was more out of a desire to put Diane at ease than an actual need for an upgrade. He understood the importance of keeping up appearances and often played along with complaints about their old car to match Diane's social status and make her feel comfortable. With a giddy sense of excitement, Ben drove off to take a spin around the neighborhood. Meanwhile, the women made themselves comfortable on the porch, engaging in pleasant conversation. "How have you been, dear? Your son must be quite the young man by now," Tammy asked, sipping her tea. "Everything's well, Mrs. Lasher," Diane responded, her voice somewhat robotic. "Levi, yes, he's matured a lot. He's responsible, intelligent. My rock." "And your love life?" Tammy probed. Diane looked down, her cheeks reddening slightly, prompting Tammy to arch an eyebrow in anticipation. "Well, there's someone new. He's a business partner of mine. I think he's interested in me. He's invited me to dinner several times under the pretense of discussing business, but these dinners have felt more like dates." "And?" Tammy pressed. "I don't know. I'm conflicted. He's attractive and he's incredibly gentle, respectful, caring, and witty. Our conversations are always enjoyable, but I don't want to rush things, especially considering Levi. Since when is having a child a problem? Don't miss out on happiness because of outdated norms," Tammy said sternly. After a moment's pause, Tammy sighed, adding, "Ever since my son returned, I've imagined introducing you two. You would have made a lovely pair, but it seems life has other plans." At this, Diane chuckled, leaning her head on Tammy's shoulder, comforted by her words and the warm affection she'd always shown her. When Mr. Lasher returned from his joyride, his face was aglow with happiness. He couldn't stop raving about the feeling of the truck Diane had gifted. Diane then surprised the couple once more, kindly offering them to move to her house in the city. The Lashers warmly thanked her but declined her generous offer. "Our son wanted us to move with him too, but why would we need the hustle and bustle of that big city? We love it here in our snug home where we've lived our whole life," they explained. The following morning, they bid Diane goodbye, standing outside their cozy home. "Promise you'll visit more often, and bring Levi with you next time," Tammy instructed, a stern look on her face replaced with a soft smile as Diane nodded, getting into her car. Back in the city, Diane delved into her work during the day and devoted her evenings to her son. However, she couldn't help but notice the increased attention from Ryan, her business partner. He'd surprise her with rare theater and opera tickets or send her favorite flowers. His knowledge of their interests amazed her, but she still hadn't revealed the most significant part of her life to him, causing her some worry. One day, she decided to address it head-on. She invited Ryan over for a coffee. "Ryan, there's something important I need to tell you," she said, looking at the smiling man sitting across from her. Ryan's smile vanished as he responded, "Yes, Diane, I'm listening." Gathering her courage, Diane began to speak. "Ryan, before things get any deeper, I want to let you know that Ryan interrupted her. "You don't really like me." Diane felt a rush of warmth spread across her cheeks and she quickly set things straight. No, that's not it at all. I actually like you a lot." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, leaving her surprised at her own boldness. A moment of silence ensued as she processed what she had just confessed. She felt an uncomfortable pang of anxiety, unsure of how she would react. Trying to break the tension, she nervously laughed and tried to lighten the mood. "Well, that came out faster than I thought it would." Ryan exhaled, visibly relieved. "So what's the matter then?" "I have a son. He's 8 years old. You're a successful, handsome young man with a bright future ahead. You could be with anyone you choose, someone perhaps more suitable. Why would you choose a single mother when you could find someone younger, someone without baggage?" "Is that all you want me to be aware of before we proceed?" Ryan asked, his gaze fixed on Diane. "I just want to make sure my son isn't seen as a burden," Diane replied, her voice laden with concern. "He means the world to me." Ryan considered her for a moment before exhaling deeply. "Do you remember the first time we met at the business center? I was so taken by you, so captivated by your presence that I barely heard a word you were saying about our potential partnership. My team had to fill me in later. That night, I wanted to learn everything about you, and it was the same night I discovered about Levi." Diane stared at him, her expression a blend of astonishment and disbelief. "But what I couldn't have imagined back then was how much I'd grow to love your son," Ryan continued. "At first, I was just curious about the two of you, so I arranged to meet Levi. Then I found myself eagerly attending his sports games and hanging out with him and his friends. Eventually, I confessed to him that I had feelings for his mother, and I asked if I could court you. He gave me his blessing." Diane's mouth fell open in shock. "What?" "I apologize," Ryan hurriedly added. "I should have discussed it with you first. I hope you're not angry." Diane was stunned. In retrospect, she realized there had been signs. The sudden appearance of toys she wouldn't normally buy, Levi's unexplained outgoings to play with the local boys, even when they hardly knew any kids in the neighborhood. But she never suspected that Ryan was behind it all. At first, she felt a flash of anger, more directed at Levi for his little secret. But as she locked eyes with Ryan, seeing his sincere and hopeful look, her anger melted away to be replaced by a tender smile. She was looking at someone who genuinely cared for her and her son, something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. While there were other men who'd shown interest in her over the years, none had managed to win the trust of both her and Levi. And so, after 9 years of putting up walls, Diane let herself embrace the possibility of love, not just for her, but for her son as well. She opened her heart to a new relationship, one that included both her and Levi. Diane's life began to burst with vibrant hues. Ryan's care and affection filled each day with a newfound joy. And it wasn't just Diane who loved him. Her son Levi adored them too, seeing in Ryan a best friend and a role model. One day, Ryan suggested introducing Diane to his parents. He planned a dinner at an upscale restaurant to make the occasion extra special. The evening arrived, and Diane, along with Ryan and Levi, awaited his parents, who were running a bit late. The anticipation made Diane jittery. This was a significant milestone in their relationship. An elderly couple walked into the restaurant, and Ryan greeted them with a warm smile, guiding them towards their table. Diane's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Tammy and Ben Lashers, the kind-hearted couple she'd come to cherish. Her heart fluttered as she recognized them, a wave of astonishment washing over her. The realization that her lover's parents were also people she held dear was nothing short of extraordinary. The elderly couple, equally surprised, barely had time to react before Diane, Levi, and the Lashers enveloped each other in a round of joyous hugs, laughter, and happy tears. The surprise reunion left Ryan utterly perplexed until it dawned on him. Diane was the same woman his mother had been trying to introduce him to, a suggestion he had always shrugged off, confident in his choice. The irony of the situation was too amusing for words. The evening unfolded into a splendid affair, filled with animated laughter and heartfelt conversations. Tammy and Ben regaled everyone with tales from Ryan's youth, while Ryan reveled in Diane's delighted reactions. The dinner marked not just a blending of their lives, but also the convergence of past connections and future possibilities, all woven into a beautiful tapestry of shared love and joy. Diane listened intently as her future husband spoke fondly of his parents, expressing his admiration and pride in them. Levi, too, reveled in the warmth of the company, where love flowed freely towards him. As the evening wound down, after everyone had savored the sumptuous meal and shared engaging conversations, Tammy clasped Diane's hand affectionately and said, "We're so grateful to have you in our lives, dear. You've always been like a daughter to us," before enveloping her in a warm embrace. Diane was overcome with emotions. She felt a wave of happiness and gratitude for the unforgettable evening, the opportunity to meet her future in-laws, and the precious gift life had bestowed upon her, a family that she was now a part of. Following dinner, Ryan insisted on driving his parents home, brushing aside their protests. Meanwhile, Diane and Levi hailed a cab, with Ryan promising to catch up with them soon. As the taxi driver awaited his passengers, a radiant Diane bid her goodbyes to the Lashers on the street. Ryan then opened the car door for Diane and Levi, promising, "I'll be with you soon." After kissing Diane and tussling Levi's hair, he shut the door. "So, where can I take you tonight?" asked the taxi driver. Diane relayed the address, and the driver felt a stir of recognition at the sound of her voice. "No, can't be," he thought to himself as he started the car. He donned his hat and couldn't resist stealing a glance in the rearview mirror. There they were, those familiar green eyes. He fought an internal battle, but his suspicions solidified. It was indeed Diane in the backseat, the very same Diane he had abandoned pregnant 9 years ago. But now she was unrecognizable, impeccably groomed, fashionable, exuding an air of confidence that spoke volumes of her strength and resilience. It was evident that she had weathered the storm and emerged triumphant. Overcome with embarrassment in a whirlwind of emotions, Caden carried on driving, occasionally stealing glances at the woman in his rearview mirror. His gaze then drifted to the boy sitting next to her. As he maneuvered through the city's traffic, he found himself drawn to the boy's features. Eventually, he ceased looking and his eyes welled up with tears. He was transported back to the days when he was carefree, living a luxurious life on his parents' money. But life had a way of humbling people, and he was now an ordinary man, eking out a living as a cab driver. They reached their destination. As Levi got out of the cab, Diane lingered behind to settle the fare. Caden felt too embarrassed to lift his gaze from under his hat. Diane noticed the driver avoiding her gaze. At first, she thought it odd, but then she took a second look and recognized the familiar contours of his face. "Caden, is that you?" she asked. Slowly, Caden looked up, his eyes brimming with tears. For a moment they locked eyes, and Diane's heart stuttered as she remembered how a decade ago she had pleaded with those same eyes. After a brief silence, Caden managed to stammer, "Hello, Diane. I'm so sorry. You hurt me, but I survived. I wish you happiness. I've forgiven you." With those words, Diane handed Caden all the cash she had in her wallet and stepped out of the cab. She took Levi's hand and they made their way towards their home. "Mom, was that someone you know?" Levi asked, noticing that his mother had lingered in the cab. "No, sweetheart. Just someone who could use a